Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
We're signing an executive order I consider to be a very important executive order. It's about keeping families together while at the same time being sure that we have a very powerful, very strong border, and border security will be equal, if not greater, than previously.
President Trump reverses himself, signing an executive order claiming to end the separation of children from their parents at the border. But critics warn the order could lead to the indefinite detention of entire families. And the government has no plans to reunite the thousands of children already separated from their families. Many of the kids have been sent thousands of miles away from the border, including New York City, where Mayor Bill de Blasio slammed the Trump administration.
Our message to the federal government is simple. Stop this right now. Stop this broken, inhumane policy right now. And come clean with the truth. Who are these children? How many are they? Where are they? What is happening here? How is it possible that none of us knew there were 239 kids right here in our own city? How is the federal government holding back that information from the people of this city?
One of those children as young as 9 months old. We'll go to Washington, D.C. and to McAllen, Texas for the latest on the crisis. Then to a shocking story out of Yemen. A new expose by the Associated Press has found officers from the United Arab Emirates have sexually tortured Yemeni prisoners in secret prisons. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President Trump signed an executive order Wednesday, reversing himself, claiming to end the separation of children from their parents at the border by jailing the kids and their parents together while their legal cases wind through the courts. The order does not say where the families will be detained or whether children will continue to be separated from their parents until the facilities are ready.
We want security for our country. The Republicans want security and insist on security for our country, and we will have that. At the same time, we have compassion. We want to keep families together. It's very important. I'll be signing something in a little while that's going to do that.
Critics warn the order will lead to the indefinite detention of entire families. And the Trump administration has so far not outlined any plans for reuniting children already separated from their families. At least 2,300 children have been separated since Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced a zero-tolerance policy in April. The Intercept reports the number jailed since last October could be as high as 3,700. On Capitol Hill, Republican House Speaker Paul Ryan said he'll allow debate today on a pair of sweeping anti-immigrant bills that would severely restrict the number of visas granted to immigrants while providing an additional $25 billion to further militarize the U.S.-Mexico border. The bills appear to be dead on arrival after North Carolina Republican Mark Meadows got in a heated confrontation with Paul Ryan over the measures, which many conservatives say don't go far enough. In New York City, children who were separated from their families were brought to a Manhattan foster care organization in the dead of night early Wednesday morning. Video broadcasts by the local news channel Spectrum News New York 1 shows 5 girls being ushered into a foster care facility in East Harlem run by Cayuga Centers just before 1 a.m. An hour later, several girls were filmed leaving the facility with their heads covered as they were ushered into a car. The video prompted outrage from New York Mayor Bill de Blasio, who questioned how the federal government could be holding separated children without telling the mayor or any city officials.
The message to the federal government is simple. Stop this right now. Stop this broken, inhumane policy right now. And come clean with the truth. Who are these children? How many are they? Where are they? What is happening here? How is it possible that none of us knew there were 239 kids right here in our own city? How is the federal government holding back that information from the people of this city?
Meanwhile, a new investigation by Reveal shows taxpayers have paid more than $1.5 billion in the last 4 years to companies operating immigrant youth shelters that faced accusations of serious lapses in care. In a number of the cases, the government kept placing children with the companies even after serious allegations had been made. Reveal also reports some children held at Shiloh Treatment Center near Houston, Texas, were restrained and injected with powerful antipsychotic drugs against their will, making them dizzy, listless, obese, and even incapacitated. American Airlines and United Airlines have asked the Trump administration to stop transporting immigrant children who've been separated from their families aboard their company planes. American Airlines said in a statement, "We have no desire to be associated with separating families, or worse, to profit from it." And United Airlines CEO Oscar Munoz said, "Our company's shared purpose is to connect people and unite the world. This policy and its impact on thousands of children is in deep conflict with that mission, and we want no part of it." Meanwhile, resistance to Trump's immigration policies continues to swell ahead of a planned national mobilization on June 30th. In Portland, Oregon, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, shut down its operations Wednesday amidst a 24-hour occupation of the area outside ICE's offices that began on Father's Day. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo claimed Wednesday the United States is working tirelessly to support refugees around the world, even as the Trump administration drew international condemnation for its policy of family separation and its treatment of asylum seekers. In a statement marking World Refugee Day yesterday, Pompeo praised the strength and courage of millions of refugees, adding, quote, "We will continue to help the world's most vulnerable refugees, reflecting the deeply held values of the American people." He made no reference to the jailed children and parents in the United States. Pompeo's comment came as Refugees International graded the Trump administration's treatment of refugees with an F in a scathing new report released Wednesday. Refugee rights groups say admissions of refugees have slowed to a crawl under President Trump, with the U.S. on track to take in just 22,000 people this year. That's less than half of Donald Trump's stated target of 45,000 refugees, which was already set to be the lowest number resettled in the U.S. since 1980. In Hungary, lawmakers have approved a harsh anti-immigrant bill that will crack down on anyone offering aid to migrants seeking asylum. Under the legislation, offering food, water, or legal advice to migrants would be outlawed. Even printing leaflets with information for asylum seekers would become a criminal offense. This is Hungarian human rights lawyer Marta Pardavi.
Today is World Refugee Day, and the Hungarian government, instead of providing protection, has decided to actually not provide protection, deny protection, and actually side with the persecutors. It starts to persecute even individuals, human rights defenders, and others who assist asylum seekers. I think this is a new low point for Hungary today, where even lawyers could face criminal prosecution.
United Nations investigators said Wednesday Syria's government committed war crimes and crimes against humanity during its 5-year siege of the Damascus suburb of eastern Ghouta, which had been occupied by rebels until it was recaptured by Syria earlier this year. A UN panel commissioned by the Human Rights Council found besieged civilians in eastern Ghouta were indiscriminately attacked and systematically denied food and medicine. The Trump administration has quietly released a major review of a national water contamination crisis caused by a family of chemicals known as PFASs after President Trump's Environmental Protection Agency suppressed publication of the federal health study. Internal emails released after a Freedom of Information Act request showed a Trump administration aide seeking to suppress the study and warning a top EPA official about the, quote, potential public relations nightmare this is going to be. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services study found the chemicals PFOA and PFOS, which are used in Teflon and firefighting foam, are unsafe for health at levels as little as 1/10 the amount the EPA had previously called safe. The Pentagon has used foams containing these chemicals in exercises at military bases nationwide. In a March report to Congress, the Pentagon listed 126 military installations where the nearby water shows potentially harmful levels of these chemicals, which have been linked to cancers and developmental delays for fetuses and babies. In climate news, nearly 100 on-air meteorologists will wear blue and red stripes as they go to broadcast today across the United States in a coordinated effort to draw attention to the threat of human-caused climate change. The stripes are a reference to a warming stripes graphic designed by climate scientist Ed Hawkins, which shows global average temperatures as a series of vertical stripes covering the years 1850 to 2017. The graphic shows a shift from blue stripes to red, with the most dramatic increases in temperature coming in recent years. The action by meteorologists united on climate change comes on the Northern Hemisphere's summer solstice and amidst extreme weather around the world. In southern Texas, emergency workers used boats to rescue trapped residents from their homes in the city of Mercedes Wednesday, after more than a foot of rain fell, leaving whole neighborhoods underwater. In Ivory Coast, at least 18 people were killed in the city of Abidjan this week after flash floods from torrential rains tore through residential neighborhoods. In India, nearly 20 people were killed and some 800,000 displaced after heavy monsoon rains caused a river to overflow its banks, flooding hundreds of villages. Heavy rains have also left parts of neighboring Bangladesh underwater, with 12 killed and 250,000 people displaced. Among the dead were 2 Rohingya refugees living in a sprawling coastal camp in Cox's Bazar near the border with Burma. Aid groups are warning of the potential flooding and landslides to displace some of the 700,000 Rohingya refugees living in makeshift shelters in Bangladesh. The former Archbishop of Washington, D.C., Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, has been removed from the ministry for sexual abuse and misconduct dating back decades. Church officials said Wednesday McCarrick was credibly accused of sexually abusing a teenager nearly 50 years ago. They also said he'd faced 3 allegations of sexual misconduct with adults in the past. The Washington Post reports Cardinal McCarrick helped shape many of the church's policies for responding to the sexual abuse crisis. In media news, Disney has increased its offer to buy 21st Century Fox to more than $71 billion, increasing its previous bid by more than a third and outbidding an offer by rival Comcast. Any deal by either Disney or Comcast would consolidate 2 of the biggest players in Hollywood and would reshape the media and entertainment industries. And in North Carolina, University of North Carolina doctoral student Maya Little has been charged with property destruction and faces possible expulsion for pouring red ink and her own blood on the university's Silent Sam statue, which was erected in 1913 to honor Confederate soldiers. In a statement, Maya Little noted students who had tossed paint on the same statue in the past to celebrate sports victories did not face criminal charges. She wrote, quote, "At UNC, dousing the monument in paint in the name of basketball is deemed a pastime, while doing the same to contextualize and fight racism is a crime. Revealing the racist violence upon which Sam was built, exposing a truth the university would like to keep covered, could result in my expulsion," she wrote. An online petition demanding the charges against Maya Little be dropped has been signed by nearly 4,000 people. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. President Trump has signed an executive order claiming to end the separation of children from their parents at the border, but critics warn the order could lead to the indefinite detention of entire families. As for the thousands of children already separated from their families, the government has no plans to reunite them with their parents. Trump made the announcement Wednesday as he stood with Vice President Mike Pence and Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen.
It's about keeping families together while at the same time being sure that we have a very powerful, very strong border, and border security will be equal, if not greater than previously. So we're going to have strong, very strong borders, but we're going to keep the families together. I didn't like the sight or the feeling of families being separated. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll get the wall. We'll get the wall done. We'll get the wall done. Yes?
Ivanka Trump showing photos of the children being separated from their...
No, Ivanka feels very strongly. My wife feels very strongly about it. I feel very strongly about it. I think anybody with a heart would feel very strongly about it. We don't like to see families separated. At the same time, we don't want people coming into our country illegally. This takes care of the problem.
President Trump also told reporters Wednesday, quote, "We don't want people coming in from the Middle East through our border using children to get through the line." The Supreme Court is expected to issue a ruling on Trump's travel ban by the end of this month. Meanwhile, children taken from their parents continue to be shipped to shelters and detention centers around the country. In New York, people went to the airport to greet children with signs that welcome them in Spanish. This comes as the Associated Press reports immigrant children as young as 14 who were housed at a juvenile detention center in Virginia say they were beaten while in handcuffs, locked in solitary confinement for long periods, and left nude and shivering in concrete cells. We begin today's show in Washington, D.C., where we're joined by Franco Ordonez. He is White House correspondent for McClatchy. His latest story, headlined, "Trump's immigration order replaces one crisis with another." A lot has happened in the last 24 hours, in the last 6 weeks, in the last months or a year and a half. But Franco, talk about President Trump reversing himself, what this executive order means, and what will happen to the thousands of children who are now jailed.
It really has been quite a turn of events in the last 24 hours. President Trump flipped. I mean, he said that he was going to force the Democrats to come to the table. He tried several times to blame his own policy on the Democrats. And in the end, he reversed himself and came out with this executive order under tremendous pressure from Republicans, from some in his family, and from, segments of his important base, his loyal base, the religious community, for one. What the executive order does is essentially says that they are no longer going to separate children from their mothers at the border when they come in. But there's a big question about how that will be done and when that will be done. There's a Flores agreement. It's called the Flores. It's a 20-year-old agreement that was relitigated just a few years ago that limits the ability of the government to detain children for more than about 20 days. Trump says he's going to keep the families together for the length of their court hearings. That can be a year, 2 years, even longer. The courts are likely not going to allow that. So this is a big question. Is the president going to seek permission first, or is he going to ask for forgiveness? Is he going to go to the court and say, hey, can we relitigate, renegotiate this, longstanding agreement? Or is he just going to lock up the children with their parents, keep them longer than the 20 days, and wait for the lawsuits? We shall see, but this thing is not going away. This is going to be a continuing battle for sure.
And Franco, can you explain when you think this executive order will be implemented?
I think they're trying to implement it very quickly, but as I point out, it's like this major court agreement limits the administration from holding these children with their parents for more than 20 days. The children, as you've pointed out, are not going to be immediately reunited with their parents. That is another big question that the Trump administration continues to get flack over. So there's a lot still to happen here. There's a lot of things that are unclear that we're going to continue to be asking questions about today.
I mean, explain how this can possibly work, and also if you can clarify the numbers for us. The government says they have something like, more than 2,300 kids. The Intercept is saying if you go back a few months, you add another, like 1,400 kids to this, that they have something like 3,700 from last October. But how do they match up these children with these parents? Some of these parents have already been deported. And as we noted in headlines, you have the mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, saying, how is it possible we have 239 children here in New York City who are being held as young as, 9 months old, and we didn't know about it, he said. He's the mayor of New York. How do they reunite the children, the parents that have already been separated, many of whom the government has said didn't have proper documentation to link the two?
It's a major problem, and we reported yesterday that this replaces one crisis with another. When we were referring to the family detention policy. You're pointing out essentially a third crisis. How do you reunite these children? I'm not sure the administration completely knows. When we asked this question, they said they were working on this, looking into it, but this is a work in progress. I mean, as you know, they until 24 hours ago, they had no plans on doing this. They were continuing to fight to maintain this policy, to try to get the Democrats to the table so that they can negotiate a settlement, to hope for today that Congress could vote on a measure that would end this situation. That looks increasingly unlikely. So you see what Trump did last night in issuing the executive order. There are so many questions about what is going to happen to these kids. Yes, there's been about 2,300 children who have been taken from their parents since the zero tolerance policy put into place. There are other children as well. There's actually about 11,000 children who are without parents and guardians. That includes, of course, more the unaccompanied children who came by themselves. But this issue of children and how you're going to handle them is going to be a big issue in the next few days, in the next few weeks. It is going to be a serious problem.
I want to bring into this conversation Bob Leibel. He's the executive director of the Austin-based civil and human rights group Grassroots Leadership, suing the state of Texas when it tried to classify ICE's family detention centers as child care facilities. They won, but the detention centers continue to operate now without a license. His new article in the Texas Observer is headlined, "It's Time to Decriminalize Immigration," co-authored with Judy Green. Can you talk about what this case is all about and where these children are being put?
Sure, and thanks for having me, Amy. As Franco said, this really trades one crisis, one cruel policy with another. What we know at this point is that as these criminal prosecutions are proceeding and as the asylum cases for these children and for these families continues, that people will be locked up in these giant for-profit family detention camps, the two largest of which are in South Texas. Now, as Franco said, the Flores settlement says that children cannot be detained in unlicensed and secure detention centers in a prolonged manner. And so the courts have ruled that means about 20 days. This is clearly a challenge to that settlement. About 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the family detention centers went to the state of Texas and tried to apply for child care licenses in an attempt to essentially prolong the detention of immigrant children in these detention camps. We successfully fought back that effort in the courts. The state of Texas tried to rewrite the laws. Actually, a private prison corporation, the GEO Group, brought a bill to the state legislature to change the way that licensing happens in Texas. That effort was beaten back to the state legislature. So for now, these family detention camps are unlicensed. They're certainly secure. They're prisons. I think that this is going to be quite the fight about the future of what happens to these children and these moms. And then I think that it is important to recognize that what is driving this policy is the zero tolerance policy that was implemented by Jeff Sessions. This is a The Trump administration has falsely said that they had no choice, right, that the law says that you have to prosecute everyone that comes to the border. This is not true. And in fact, these laws were used sparingly until about 2004, 2005, when a policy called Operation Streamline was implemented. The piece that Judy and I wrote in the Texas Observer yesterday makes the argument that if the Trump administration is asking for a legislative fix, that pro-immigrant forces in Congress should give the Trump administration that legislative fix and should introduce legislation that would repeal the laws that allow Jeff Sessions to prosecute people en masse. So to repeal 8 U.S. Code 1325, which is unlawful entry, and 1326, which is unlawful reentry, which are the criminal prosecutions which are driving this entire crisis.
Well, Bob, I want to go to the GEO Group, which you mentioned. During hearings on whether Texas should issue a license to family detention centers, a Honduran woman named Norma, who spent more than a month detained at the Karnes County Family Detention Center, told a committee about her daughter turned 5 while locked up there. Quote, she said, "My daughter knew she was a prisoner. I don't think that a place full of cameras and security guards is a place for children." Bob, can you say a little bit more about this GEO Group and what role it plays in these detention centers?
Sure. The for-profit detention centers in South Texas, there's one in Karnes that is operated by GEO Group and one in Dilley that is the nation's largest immigration detention center at 2,400 beds that's operated by CoreCivic, which was formerly known as Corrections Corporation of America. So these are the two largest for-profit prison corporations. And, you know, both of these companies are publicly traded and their stock soared yesterday, which I think gives you an indication of how investors are seeing this policy change as one that is going to benefit the private prison industry. These facilities are prisons. There is no doubt about that. And I think that the testimony that we've heard repeatedly from the moms and the kids and some of the workers in the facility who have quit in protest indicate that these are no place for children. They're no place for families. The trauma that people experience of being locked up in these facilities is real. During our litigation and during the legislative fight at the Texas Capitol, we heard from pediatricians, we heard from social workers, we heard from formerly detained women and their children, all of whom said this is no place for a child.
Can you talk about what this crisis at this moment has brought into stark relief for you? You've been working on this issue for a long time. Of course, the for-profit industry like GEO Group helping to draft a Texas law, the corporations being involved with the writing of the laws that would allow the family detention centers to be licensed as child care facilities without meeting all the state's requirements.
Sure. I mean, I think that this puts into, stark contrast what our options are moving forward. And I think that everyone who is concerned about the welfare of immigrant children and immigrant families needs to stand up and say that indefinite detention of families in for-profit detention camps is not a solution to family separation. The push at this point needs to be to end family detention, to end family separation, and to be really pushing to end the underlying laws that drive these policies. We simply can't give someone like Jeff Sessions the ability to continue to criminally prosecute people en masse at the border. I think that this administration has proven that they have no regard for the immigrant children and their parents at the border. And I think that when you see a policy that's implemented that benefits the private prison industry at the expense of immigrant children and their parents, I think that really tells the entire story.
We want to thank you for being with us, Bob Leibel with Grassroots Leadership, speaking to us from Austin. Franco Ordonez, we'd like to ask you to stay with us. We're going to break, and when we come back, we'll talk with a person in McAllen, Texas, who's talking about trying to reunite these children, that the Trump administration said as late as last night they have no plans for. They don't know what to do with these 2,300 children. Stay with us.
Good evening, people. How do you do? I'd like to spend a little time with you, talking about how long, tell me how long. I am Tyrone, here I stand, all day long I'm your post office man. How long, tell me how long. Well, I am mailing, I made your coat, can't get no green card, ain't got no vote. How long, tell me how long. They call me Chico. Who do I think? No health insurance, nothing in the bank. How long,
How Long Blues, the legendary singer Barbara Dane performing yesterday in our Democracy Now! Studios. Tonight, she's performing at Joe's Pub in her first New York City show in 15 years. May 12th was her 91st birthday. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We go now to McAllen, Texas, where we're joined by Zenon Jaimes, who is the advocacy director for the Texas Civil Rights Project. He's part of their team that goes to the federal courthouse in McAllen each day since Trump began his zero-tolerance policy and collects information from parents who had their children taken away from them before they were taken to court to face criminal charges for crossing the border. So, Zenon, can you talk about your response to the executive order and what you've learned from the parents who you've spoken to at the courthouse?
Yes, thank you so much for having me on. I think your guest already hit the nail on the head. This is, for us, no solution to what the crisis is actually happening. Now, since the executive order, since the zero tolerance policy was announced, we knew that McAllen and South Texas was going to be ground zero because this is where we're seeing most of the crossings as well as asylum seekers. And so since the end of May to today, we have interviewed over 350 people and done intake with them. And these are people who have been separated from their children, right? And so this is just in the McAllen courthouse. And as of right now, we're looking to connect all of them with legal counsel, but the crisis remains, right? We have no idea what the next steps are to connect them with their children who are currently in ORR shelters. And speaking personally, having done these intakes myself, we've spoken to mothers with children as young as 4 years old to fathers with children who are 16 years old who came here because they were being threatened by gang members or being threatened to join these gangs. Now, and Bob also had talked about this very clearly, but the crisis was from the beginning the zero tolerance policy. And instead of going back on that, the executive order yesterday actually doubled down. We can still expect the same number of prosecutions to be happening in the McAllen courthouse. And for us, it's going to be just as important to keep going because actually the separation will continue. When someone is sent from the CBP processing center to the McAllen courthouse, they will not be with their child, right? So there's going to be around a 72-hour turnaround from when that person is getting their criminal prosecution to when they're exactly going to be sent to a family detention center, which is still unclear where exactly because we're already at capacity with almost all of these centers.
Well, could you also say something, Zenon, about the Flores settlement and whether you think it's actually possible for it to be negotiated or changed in such a way that the Trump administration will actually be able to detain children for more than 20 days?
Yeah, so many people have fought for the Flores settlement for many decades at this point. We now sort of see and understand, and many people have been raising this alarm for many weeks now, that this was the initial intention of the administration, right, to stuff up a ruckus, separate these people, and then when it came down to it, when the images became too horrific, to say, well, okay, well, we can keep them together. We're just going to keep them together in jail. Now, it remains to be seen how exactly this is going to work. We are sort of hearing different things, but we think that it's going to be the intention of the administration to basically try to violate the Flores Agreement and this way force an entire conversation on this. And that would be catastrophic because it would lead to the indefinite detention of these families, which we know this is what the administration is seeking in the first place as a way to deter people from even coming. And we have to keep that in mind, right? They're trying to punish children and families to basically send a message to the rest of the Americans and all over the world that if you come here, you not only will you get criminal prosecution, but we will hold you in a prison for indefinite amount of time.
Now, can you explain what it means, Zenon, when the government announces today if parents want to get their children back, they have to go through the normal sponsorship process? And really, what exactly is happening? I mean, we spoke to Congressmember Jayapal, who went to a prison in Washington state where well over 100 women are held. A number of them, their children, they don't know where they were. They were shipped to, the mothers were flown to Washington state. Meanwhile, you have the Secretary of Homeland Security saying, oh, they can Skype their kids all the time. They don't know where they are. And what it means to say they can now go through the normal sponsorship process. When they call a number that they were handed in court, it says something like, if you want to get your kid back, you can leave a message here, but know that what you say here can and will be used against you in court.
Yes, exactly. And you sort of highlighted the exact nature of the black hole of all of the information here. So what we're currently thinking will be happening, and remember, this is just all very new and the administration has not been clear, is that parents who are currently in immigration detention will have to go through the normal Office of Refugee Resettlement process to sponsor and get their children back. Now, this in itself is a long and arduous process, and remember that ORR is under the Health and Human Services Department. This can involve months of background checks, fingerprinting, in some instances saliva tests. Part of the ACLU lawsuit that happened a couple months ago showed that one mother had to take saliva tests 4 times to basically prove that it was her child. And at the end of the day, the administration is making it even more difficult to get children sponsored. So, it might be many months, and in some cases maybe over a year, before parents who, remember, are in detention facilities, many of them will not have legal counsel or any kind of help to navigate all of the system before they even get a chance of sponsoring and seeing their children again.
Well, we want to thank you very much for joining us, Zenon Jaimes, joining us from McAllen, Texas. And now we're going to go to New Orleans, and we are just on the phone with Aura Bagado, who is immigration reporter with Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting. Her latest stories headlined Immigrant Children Forcibly Injected with Drugs Lawsuit Claims, and Migrant Children Sent to Shelters with Histories of Abuse Allegations. Aura, tell us what you found.
Hi, Amy. We've been looking into these migrant shelters for a while, and we have found over 100 allegations, investigation violations, crimes for which people were sent to prison, and other kinds of examples in which some pretty serious stuff happened. Sometimes that has to do with the forcible injection of heavy psychotropic drugs on sometimes pretty young children, sexual assault allegations, solicitation of child pornography for which someone is currently serving, I believe, a 10-year sentence. That's some pretty horrific stuff.
And could you describe, Aura, what the effects you learned about what the effects have been of some of these psychotropic drugs that children have been forcibly injected with?
And who gets to choose that they are being injected? What do they know about their medical histories?
Yeah, what happens is that children go to a first shelter, and sometimes they're stepped up. That's the term that the government uses, is they're stepped up in terms of if they see a behavior that they don't like in children, they can be referred to a psychiatrist who then independently makes a determination. In the case of a family here in New Orleans that I've been spending time with, there was a 9-year-old boy who never had a history of mental illness. He repeatedly talked about wanting to leave, wanting to run away, wanting to reconnect, reunite with his mother, and tried to run away. And because of that behavior and some other behaviors, he was then referred to a psychiatrist, as I explained. That psychiatrist created a narrative in which he said that he recommended the child be placed under certain drugs, and the government then decided to take him to the Shiloh Treatment Center, which is a place right outside Houston, Texas. He was drugged there without his consent and without his mother's consent for nearly 6 months. The government knew the entire time where his mom was. They conducted 2 home visits where she lives, and they refused to give her custody of her child. She begged. She sometimes was angry. She sometimes tried negotiating. She tried so many different ways, and multiple text messages that I saw between her and the caseworker and her and other workers at this facility in Texas, and they would not give her child back. Sometimes the response was nothing. She wouldn't hear back from them for several days. It was often something like, that's the doctor's orders. He's been prescribed that, and we can't do anything about it. And, when I talk about a residential treatment center, people might think that this is, some kind of serious inpatient a building, or perhaps, a large kind of estate in which people can really heal. What our investigation found is that there are a lot of properties that are associated with Shiloh, even though it only uses one main address. Most of those properties are trailers.
And Aura, as far as you know, how long has this been going on?
Shiloh, in particular, first got its contract from the government in 2013 to house immigrant children, but it has been housing children in general for a lot longer. Several years before then, a child that was in Shiloh's custody died from being restrained there. It was still able to keep its license and continue operating, and there have been violations that the government, the federal government knows about, that local officials have been outraged about, and that the state of Texas itself, we found a lot of this through public record. You can see inspection records as recently as December. There's a report that said that, very serious, some of these psychotropic medicines were left out in the reach of children, where they could just access them. There are a lot of inspection reports that indicate that not everything was up to par there.
I wanted to bring Franco Ordonez back into the conversation. You also reported Wednesday that Trump planned to erect 10 cities to house immigrants since the start of his presidency. Reading from the beginning of your story, you write, the Department of Homeland Security asked Congress for $95 million to erect tent cities in 2 locations in Texas to detain all immigration violators, according to a budget document shared with McClatchy and provided to Congress in March of 2017. Can you talk about the so-called soft-sided structure facilities in Tornillo and Donna, Texas, to house immigrants, possibly unaccompanied children or families, after the U.S. sees this surge in the number of immigrants crossing its southern border during the Obama administration?
Yes. Essentially what we're seeing is that the Trump administration, partially because of the zero tolerance policy, but because they've been pushing this enforcement since the beginning of the administration and had obviously planned to increase this enforcement right from the beginning, really since the campaign, they ran out or are running out very quickly of detention space these child shelters. They have no more room to put them. There's about 11,200, more than that, children who are held without parents in these type of shelters. They're about 95% full. So they need this extra space. So they're building these tent cities to hold these children in those on military bases in order to accommodate the additional children that are being held. The ones that the tent cities we're told, are for unaccompanied minors, not the separated children. But if the children weren't separated, there would be more space in those facilities. So these tent cities are to kind of make up for that missing space.
And finally, Auro Bagado, you've been reporting on this for a while, before zero tolerance policy was put into effect 6 weeks ago, and then Trump has reversed it with an executive order. People don't even understand why he needed an executive order to do this. But when you talk about sexual abuse, kids being injected with drugs, being sent to psychiatrists to ask what their problem is when they are just asking for their parents to be reunited with their parents, and then when they're upset, being injected or being given pills. The number of people they need to staff these places now, with the influx of children they're imprisoning and families, will make them even more vulnerable. Is that not right? I mean, what level of scrutiny does any person who is hired get right now as these centers try to desperately staff up for thousands more people?
Right. What these centers, these nonprofits, sometimes they're private companies, sometimes they're religious, sometimes they're not. What they consistently have said in the past is, we do a background check on everybody. That's probably true. I don't know how extensive that background check is. Also, a background check, it's likely that a lot of people would pass a background check and not necessarily understand how to deal with, particularly young children who've experienced a lot of trauma. It's hard to say. I obviously can't look into the future and say, oh, for sure we'll see more allegations and more arrests and crimes that we can confirm. But, when you have a lot of people that are coming into a space, a lot of young people, a lot of extremely vulnerable people who've been trafficked, people who have been through tremendous abuse, and not to mention the journey alone, that does, create a very vulnerable population, and we know that vulnerable populations often are a prime target, unfortunately, an easy target for abusers. So again, I can't predict what's going to happen. I don't think it would surprise a lot of people if we start hearing about more allegations in the future.
Well, we want to thank you, Auro Bagado, for joining us, immigration reporter for Reveal from the Center for Investigative Reporting. We'll link to your pieces, Immigrant Children Forcibly Injected with Drugs Lawsuit Claims, and Migrant Children Sent to Shelters with Histories of Abuse Allegations. I want to thank Franco Ordonez, White House correspondent from McClatchy, Washington Bureau. His latest story we'll link to. Trump's immigration order replaces one crisis with another. This is Democracy Now! We're going to go abroad next to Egypt to learn about what's happening in Yemen. The U.S.-backed Saudi UAE attack on Yemen. We're going to learn about what's happening to Yemeni prisoners in UAE jails in Yemen. Stay with us.
Now. Okay, sing that. Be reasonable and demand the impossible now. First we'll tear down the towers, bring back the neighborhoods, start at the bottom, work down to the top. House all the homeless in the great halls of Congress. Ban all the guns and bust all the bad cops, and be reasonable and demand the impossible now. Be reasonable, demand the impossible now. Well, we free up the freeways for bike lanes and walkways. Fast tracks and toll booths can all be shut down. Make systems for people to differences equal instead of the wrong way around. Well, be reasonable and demand the impossible now. Be reasonable. reasonable and demand the impossible now. With parking lots filled up, with playgrounds and schools, we can do what we like, because we like what we do. We'll build gardens and hospitals in every mall, and we'll stop the wars once and for all. What? Stop the wars once and for all.
Be reasonable and demand the impossible now. The legendary singer Barbara Dane performing in our studio tonight. She's performing at Joe's Pub here in New York. This is Democracy Now! I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We turn now to a shocking new investigation of rampant sexual violence against Yemeni detainees held in prisons run by the United Arab Emirates in Yemen. The Associated Press reports that in March, 15 officers lined up the prisoners in the southern city of Aden and ordered them to undress before searching their anal cavities, claiming they were looking for contraband cell phones. The men screamed and cried, and those who resisted were beaten and threatened by dogs. Hundreds of detainees reportedly suffered similar abuse. Witnesses told the AP that detainees were raped while other guards filmed the assaults. AP also reports that Yemeni guards working under Emirati officers electrocuted prisoners' genitals and sexually violated others with wooden and steel poles. A Pentagon spokesman quoted in the piece said the allegations were not substantiated.
The UAE is a key ally of the United States and has partnered with Saudi Arabia in its military assault on Yemen. Last year, AP exposed the existence of secret prisons run by the United Arab Emirates in Yemen, where torture was widespread. For more, we're going to Cairo to speak with Maggie Michel, the AP journalist who wrote the expose. The headline, Detainees Held Without Charges Decry Emiratis' Sexual Abuses. Welcome to Democracy Now! Maggie, talk about what you found.
Hi. Our investigation started in 2016, and since that time we have been speaking to witnesses, to security officials, families, and finally in this investigation we managed to speak to prisoners inside the prisons. They're talking about how sexual abuse is being used as a way to extract confessions and sometimes to turn them into informants to the Emiratis who are supervising and running prisons directly or indirectly through their own allies of security forces they set up in southern Yemen. Our investigation last year exposed a network of 18 prisons in cities of Aden and Mukalla. And our investigation this year found that of these prisons, at least 5, there's a lot of sexual abuse happening to detainees. And what's different this time is that we also spoke to officials who were at one point allied with the Emiratis. They were working for them, and then they defected. Their testimonies were very important to confirm what the prisoners and what the families have been saying all the time. That they're being held without charges, no trials. Even those who were granted prosecutors like orders to be released, they still kept in detention. The officials, and I mean one of them at least, was involved in the torture. He confirmed that they were filming detainees while being raped in order to press them, in order to turn them into informants.
Well, can you say, Maggie, the drawings, some of which our television viewers can now see, the drawings that you received from the prisoners, how you got access to those drawings?
The thing is that we communicated with the prisoners inside Bir Ahmed in Aden, southern Yemen. And one of them is a really good artist who, in order to answer my questions about what exactly is happening, he decided to show it to me by drawing positions of torture, abuse, and then took pictures and then by phones and then sent them by WhatsApp. And this is how we got them. And lately they have been finding it hard to use the same way, and we relied more on text messages from inside the prison.
Maggie, you were told by some prisoners that the American personnel in the prisons were there in uniform and must be aware of the torture. One senior security official at the prison in the city of Mukalla said in your piece, Americans use Emiratis as gloves to do their dirty work. Explain what U.S. involvement is.
Based on what we had last year and this year, Americans are in main base of Emiratis in Yemen. So this is including Mukalla, Balhaf in Shawa, and there's a place called Bureka. These have American interrogators. There are American personnel in uniform. There are also mercenaries, including Americans. The main mission is interrogation. And what we were told also that torture does not happen in front of the Americans, but they are aware of it, either by hearing people being tortured or by seeing marks of torture on their bodies. What this official in Rayyan, in Mukalla, told me is that Americans are aware of what's happening, and they're not only aware, they're actually part of it. And instead of doing the torture themselves in order to get confessions, they're using the Emiratis to do the dirty work.
And Maggie, can you talk about the role of the United Arab Emirates? I mean, now it's taken a leading role in the Saudi assault on Yemen, in particular its assault on Hodeidah, the crucial port of Hodeidah.
This is the dilemma of the Yemeni government. On one side, it needs the Emiratis because it's leading the forces that are fighting the Houthi rebels who occupied northern Yemen since 2015 in order to liberate and take over Hodeidah port from the Houthis. Hodeidah is known as the mouth of Yemen. This is where most of the humanitarian aid and imports get through northern Yemen, where the strong majority of the population is concentrated. So the port is very important for the two sides, for the government and for the Houthis. So the government needs and relies on the Emiratis in taking over Hodeidah. At the same time, in southern Yemen, where the government should be having the upper hand, instead the Emiratis have taken the lead. They set up their own militias in every single city. Each of these militias have their own tribal and regional agenda, and they set up prisons. They took control. It undermined to a great extent the Yemeni government. And until just last week, the president of Yemen was barred from returning to the government for nearly a year. He was in Saudi Arabia, and we reported that based on his own aides and commanders, he couldn't get back to Yemen because the Emiratis didn't want him to return.
Maggie, we just have 30 seconds. We just have 30 seconds, and I just wanted to quickly ask, is the U.S. involved with giving lists of names of Yemenis to the Emiratis to jail?
The Americans have a list of most wanted men, but not every single man arrested by the Emiratis are on the list. The Emiratis are trying to get information about the men in the list through mass arrest.
Maggie Michaud, we want to thank you for being with us. We're going to link to your piece. Maggie is a reporter for Associated Press. Her latest piece, Detainees Held Without Charges Decry Emiratis' Sexual Abuses. We'll also link to her last year's piece, In Yemen's Secret Prisons, UAE Tortures, and U.S. Interrogates. That's all for the show. Demoction are produced by Mike Burke, Renee Phelps, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Sam Alcoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. Thanks for joining us.